The morning mist still clung to Willow Creek when Marcus found her crouched beneath his farmhouse porch, clutching a scrawny red hen and a diamond wedding ring that caught the first rays of sunlight like captured fire. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young, dirt streaking her tear-stained cheeks, and whispered the words that would change everything. "I have nowhere left to go." Marcus studied the strange woman, the agitated chicken, and the ring she held like a lifeline, then said the words that surprised even himself. "Stay if both still fit." What happened next would test everything he thought he knew about second chances, broken hearts, and the unexpected ways love finds its way home. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The gravel crunched under Marcus Sullivan's worn leather boots as he stepped off the wraparound porch of his grandfather's farmhouse, coffee mug in hand, surveying the rolling pastures of Sullivan Creek Ranch. Dawn was breaking over the Tennessee hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded him why he'd never left this place, even when every practical voice in his head told him he should have years ago. At 32, Marcus had inherited more than just land from his grandfather. He'd inherited the stubborn streak that kept him working a ranch that barely broke even, the quiet nature that made him more comfortable with horses than people, and the deep-seated belief that some things were worth preserving even when the world moved on without you. His grandfather's voice still echoed in his memory during moments like these. "Boy, this land will test you, but it'll also teach you everything you need to know about what matters." The silence of morning was broken by an unfamiliar sound. Soft sobbing, muffled, but unmistakably human, coming from somewhere beneath the farmhouse. Marcus set his mug on the porch railing and crouched down, peering into the shadows under the wooden slats. That's when he saw her. A woman, maybe 28 or 29, pressed against the stone foundation with her knees drawn up, her auburn hair falling like a curtain around her face. In her arms, she held a red hen that seemed remarkably calm despite the circumstances, and in her other hand, she clutched what appeared to be a wedding ring. The morning light filtering through the porch boards created strange patterns across her faded jeans and worn sneakers. "Ma'am?" Marcus's voice was gentle, the way his grandfather had taught him to speak to spooked animals. "You all right under there?" She looked up, startled, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray-blue and filled with a kind of exhaustion that went bone-deep. She had the look of someone who'd been running for a long time and had finally run out of road. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to trespass. I just needed somewhere to rest, and your porch looked safe, and Henrietta was getting tired." She indicated the chicken with a slight nod. Marcus blinked. "Henrietta?" "My hen. She's all I have left." The woman's grip tightened protectively around the bird, and Marcus noticed how her fingers trembled. "We've been walking since yesterday evening. I saw your mailbox," said Sullivan Ranch, and I remembered. "Remembered what?" She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face in the filtered morning light. "You're Marcus Sullivan. We went to high school together. You probably don't remember me. I'm Elena. Elena Reeves. Well, Elena Morrison now. Or I was." She held up the wedding ring, and Marcus saw that her ring finger was bare, pale where the band had been. The name hit him like a physical blow. Elena Reeves. Of course he remembered her. She'd been the girl who sat 2 rows ahead of him in chemistry class, the one who always had her nose in a book during lunch, the one who'd helped him with his English essays when he was struggling to keep his grades up for football. She'd been quiet, thoughtful, with a smile that could light up a room when she chose to share it. He'd harbored a secret crush on her for most of senior year, but had never found the courage to ask her out. "Elena," he said, and her name felt familiar on his tongue despite the years. "What are you doing under my porch at 6 in the morning with a chicken?" A laugh escaped her, short and bitter. "That's a fair question. The short answer is that my husband died 3 months ago. The bank took our house last week, and I've been driving around in circles ever since, trying to figure out where to go. The long answer is more complicated." Marcus straightened up and extended his hand toward her. "Why don't you come out of there and we can talk about both answers over some coffee? Henrietta's welcome too, I suppose." Elena hesitated, then reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold despite the warming morning air. She crawled out from under the porch with surprising grace, still cradling the hen, who looked around with bright, curious eyes as if she approved of the change in scenery. Standing in the full morning light, Elena looked even more fragile than she had in the shadows. She was thinner than he remembered from high school. Her clothes hung loose on her frame, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. But she was still beautiful, still had that quiet strength he remembered, even if it looked tested now. "I must look like a crazy person," she said, self-consciously pushing her hair back from her face. "Showing up here with a chicken, hiding under your porch like some kind of vagrant." "You look like someone who's had a hard time," Marcus said simply. "And you're not hiding anymore. You're here, and that's what matters. Come on inside. I've got fresh coffee, and I think there might be some grain in the barn that Henrietta would appreciate." As they walked toward the front steps, Elena spoke quietly. "I wasn't sure you'd even still be here. When I drove through town yesterday, everything looked so different. Half the places I remembered are gone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "Progress, they call it," Marcus said with a wry smile. "Though I'm not always sure it's moving in the right direction. I'm still here, though. Can't seem to leave this place, even when common sense suggests I should." "Why not?" Marcus paused at the front door, considering his answer. "This ranch has been in my family for 4 generations. My great-grandfather built the original farmhouse with his own hands. My grandfather expanded it, taught me everything I know about working the land. When he passed 5 years ago, selling seemed like the practical thing to do. Land values were good. I could have moved to Nashville, found a job with regular hours and health insurance. But you stayed. I stayed. Couldn't bear the thought of watching some developer turn it into a subdivision. Besides, the horses need someone who understands them, and the land needs someone who respects it. Some things are worth preserving, even when they don't make financial sense." Elena nodded, understanding flickering in her eyes. "That's what Daniel used to say about his pottery studio. He'd spend hours creating pieces that barely covered the cost of materials, but he said some things were worth doing just because they fed your soul." "Daniel was your husband?" "Yes, brain cancer, diagnosed 2 years ago, gone 3 months ago. He fought hard, but in the end." She trailed off, her free hand unconsciously touching the wedding ring she still held. Marcus opened the front door and gestured for her to enter. The farmhouse interior was exactly what Elena had expected from someone like Marcus. Clean but lived in, furnished with pieces that had clearly been in the family for generations, worn leather chairs that molded to your body, a stone fireplace that dominated one wall, built-in bookshelves filled with volumes on agriculture, veterinary care, and local history. The kitchen was visible through an open doorway, and she could see it was functional rather than fancy, with white cabinets that had been painted more than once, and countertops that showed the wear of daily use. "Sit anywhere you like," Marcus said, heading toward the kitchen. "How do you take your coffee?" "Lack is fine." Elena settled into one of the leather chairs, still holding Henrietta, who seemed perfectly content to be an indoor chicken for the moment. "Marcus, I should explain why I'm really here. It's not just that I needed a place to rest." He returned with 2 steaming mugs and settled into the chair across from her. "I'm listening." Elena took a sip of coffee, gathering her courage. "When Daniel got sick, we used up our savings pretty quickly. Insurance covered some of the treatments, but not all of them. I sold everything I could sell, took out loans against everything I could borrow against. By the time he died, we owed more than the house was worth. That's why the bank took it. But before Daniel died, when he knew he wasn't going to make it, he gave me this." She held up the wedding ring. "He said if things got really bad, if I had nowhere else to turn, I should find you." Marcus nearly dropped his coffee mug. "He said what?" "Daniel knew about my high school crush," Elena said with a sad smile. "I may have mentioned you once or twice over the years. When we were dating, when we first got married, when I was feeling nostalgic, he used to tease me about the one that got away. But near the end, when he was making sure I'd be okay after he was gone, he got serious about it." "What did he say?" Elena's voice became quieter, as if she were sharing something sacred. He said that from everything I'd told him about you, you were the kind of man who would help someone in trouble, no questions asked. He said you had a good heart and a strong sense of what was right. He made me promise that if I ever got to the point where I had nowhere else to turn, I'd come find you. The weight of her words settled between them like a challenge. Marcus studied Elena's face, looking for signs of manipulation or desperation that might cloud her honesty. But all he saw was exhaustion and a courage that was hanging by threads. That's a lot of faith to put in someone he'd never met, Marcus said finally. Daniel was a good judge of character, and he loved me enough to want to make sure I'd be safe, even after he was gone. The ring, she held it up again, was his grandmother's. It's the most valuable thing I have left, and he wanted me to use it as collateral if I needed to. Collateral for what? For asking you to let me stay here until I can figure out what comes next. I know it's crazy showing up after 15 years with a sob story and a chicken, but Daniel was right about one thing. I really don't have anywhere else to go. Marcus set down his coffee mug and leaned forward, his hands clasped between his knees. Elena could see him thinking, weighing options, considering consequences. She'd forgotten how deliberate he was, how he never rushed into decisions. "Where have you been staying since you lost the house?" he asked. "My car, mostly. Henrietta and I have been sleeping in parking lots, truck stops, anywhere that seems safe. I still have a little money left, but not enough for deposits on apartments or anything like that. I applied for jobs in Memphis, but most places want an address, references, things I can't provide right now." "Well, what kind of work do you do?" "I was a bookkeeper for Daniel's pottery business, but before that I worked for a veterinary clinic. I'm good with animals, good with numbers, and I'm not afraid of hard work. I know this ranch probably doesn't generate enough income to justify hiring help, but I could earn my keep. I could help with the books, assist with the animals, whatever you need." Marcus stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the pastures where his horses grazed in the morning sun. Elena waited, hardly breathing, while Henrietta made soft clucking sounds that seemed to echo her own nervousness. "Tell me about the chicken," he said finally. Elena blinked, surprised by the question. Henrietta? She was Daniel's favorite. He raised chickens as a hobby, said it kept him grounded when the pottery business got stressful. When we lost the house, I had to find homes for most of them, but I couldn't bear to give up Henrietta. She's all I have left of that life. "Does she lay eggs?" "Every day. She's a good hen." Marcus turned back to face her, and Elena saw something in his expression that gave her hope. "I've been thinking about getting some chickens. The ranch could use them, and fresh eggs would be nice. But chickens need proper housing, protection from predators, regular care. I know how to take care of chickens," Elena said quickly. "Daniel taught me everything about raising them properly." "And you think your ring would be fair collateral for room and board while you get back on your feet?" Elena nodded, though she could feel her heart breaking a little at the thought of letting go of the last piece of Daniel she had left. "It's worth about $3,000. That should cover a few months, give me time to find work and save up enough to get my own place." Marcus was quiet for another long moment, and Elena found herself holding her breath again. Finally he spoke, and his words surprised her. "Keep the ring." "What?" "Keep the ring. It belongs to you, and you're going to need it more than I need collateral." He sat back down, his decision made. "You can stay here, Elena, not because of some ring, or because your husband asked you to find me, but because it's the right thing to do. And because, if I'm being honest, this place could use someone else's presence." Elena felt tears spring to her eyes. "Marcus, I can't let you do that. I need to pay my way somehow." "You will. You'll help with the animals, keep the books, and make sure Henrietta settles in properly. In exchange, you'll have room and board and a small salary. Nothing fancy, but enough to help you save up for whatever comes next." "You mean it?" "I mean it. But I have one condition." Elena's heart sank. "What is it?" Marcus smiled, and for a moment she saw the boy she'd known in high school. the one who'd been too shy to ask her to prom, but who'd always been kind when their paths crossed in the hallways. "Both of you have to promise to stay long enough to make it worth my while to build a proper chicken coop. Henrietta's going to need a good home, and I'm going to need time to learn how to take care of chickens properly." Elena laughed through her tears, and for the first time in months, it was a sound of pure relief and gratitude. "I think we can manage that." The first week at Sullivan Creek Ranch passed in a blur of adjustment and discovery. Elena had forgotten what it felt like to wake up in a real bed, to shower without worrying about quarters for the machine, to drink coffee that wasn't from a gas station. Marcus had given her the guest room on the second floor, a cozy space with faded floral wallpaper and windows that looked out over the pastures where his horses grazed each morning. Henrietta had taken to ranch life with surprising enthusiasm. Marcus had spent 2 days building a temporary pen near the barn, complete with a small coop that Elena helped design. The hen seemed to approve of her new accommodations, laying an egg faithfully each morning and following Elena around the property like a feathered shadow. Marcus admitted he'd never seen a chicken with such personality. Elena threw herself into ranch work with the determination of someone who understood the value of earning her place. She reorganized Marcus's chaotic filing system, discovering that he'd been overpaying for feed supplies and missing tax deductions that could save him hundreds of dollars. His bookkeeping was the work of someone who understood ranching but had no patience for paperwork. "You've been hemorrhaging money," she told him one evening as they sat on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "Your feed supplier has been charging you retail prices when you qualify for bulk discounts. And you never filed for the agricultural exemption on your property taxes." Marcus shook his head, embarrassed. "Numbers have never been my strong suit. I can spot a lame horse from 50 yards away, but ask me to reconcile a bank statement, and I might as well be reading hieroglyphics." "That's what I'm here for," Elena said, and something in her voice made him look at her more closely. She'd gained a little weight over the past week, and the dark circles under her eyes were fading. The constant tension that had marked her features when she'd first crawled out from under his porch was beginning to ease. "You like it here," he observed. Elena nodded, her fingers absently stroking Henrietta, who had claimed a permanent spot on her lap during evening porch time. I'd forgotten what quiet sounded like. In Memphis, there was always noise. Traffic, sirens, neighbors arguing through thin walls. Here, you can actually hear yourself think. "Gets lonely sometimes," Marcus admitted, "especially in winter when the days are short and the work is lighter. I spend more time talking to the horses than I probably should. Nothing wrong with talking to animals. They're better listeners than most people." Elena's voice carried a note of sadness that made Marcus wonder about her marriage, about the life she'd left behind. "Tell me about Daniel," he said gently. "What was he like?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus thought she might not answer. Then she spoke, her voice soft with memory. He was gentle, patient, the kind of man who would spend hours teaching a child how to throw pottery, even when they made more mess than actual pottery. He had these huge hands completely covered in calluses from working clay, but when he touched you, it was like being handled by someone who understood exactly how fragile things could be. "How long were you married?" 8 years. We met at a craft fair where he was selling his pottery. I was there with friends, just browsing, and I stopped at his booth because he had this beautiful set of bowls that reminded me of something my grandmother might have owned. He started explaining his glazing process, and I could see how much he loved what he did. His whole face lit up when he talked about his work. Sounds like a good man. He was, even when he got sick. Even when the treatments made him so weak he could barely stand, he kept trying to work. Said the clay kept him connected to something larger than the cancer. Elena's voice caught slightly. Near the end, his hands shook too much to center the clay on the wheel, but he'd still sit in his studio for hours, just touching the different pieces he'd made over the years. Marcus felt a pang of sympathy for the man he'd never met, and a deeper respect for Elena's strength. Must have been hard, watching someone you love go through that. The hardest part wasn't watching him die, Elena said, surprising him. The hardest part was watching him worry about me. He spent his last months trying to make sure I'd be okay after he was gone, instead of just letting me take care of him. That's why he made me promise to find you. He couldn't bear the thought of me being alone with nowhere to turn. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Marcus found himself thinking about loneliness, about the choices people made to protect the ones they loved, about the strange ways life brought people together when they needed each other most. "Elena," he said finally, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why didn't we ever talk in high school? I mean, really talk. Not just about homework or class projects." Elena smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "Because you were Marcus Sullivan, star quarterback, and I was Elena Reeves, bookworm who spent lunch in the library. We didn't exactly move in the same circles. I wasn't that much of a jock stereotype, was I?" "No, you weren't. That's what made it worse. You were popular but not arrogant, athletic but not stupid, friendly but not fake. You were genuinely nice to everyone, which made it impossible to dismiss you as just another dumb football player." Marcus laughed. "So my niceness was a character flaw? Your niceness was intimidating. Girls like me don't expect boys like you to notice them, and when you were kind, it was easy to mistake politeness for something more. I spent half of senior year convinced you were going to ask me to prom, and the other half convinced I was deluding myself." "I wanted to ask you to prom," Marcus admitted. "I probably rehearsed the conversation 100 times in my head, but every time I got close to actually doing it, I'd lose my nerve. You always seemed so focused, so sure of where you were going. I figured you'd think a ranch kid who planned to stay in Tennessee his whole life wasn't worth your time." "I would have said yes," Elena said quietly. "In case you were wondering." The admission hung between them, loaded with years of what if and might have been. Marcus felt a familiar stirring, the same attraction he'd felt for her in high school, but had never acted on. She was still beautiful, still had that quiet intelligence that had drawn him to her, but now there was something else. A depth that came from loss. A strength that came from surviving more than anyone should have to survive. "Would you like to see the rest of the ranch tomorrow?" he asked, changing the subject before the moment became too heavy. "There are some trails up in the hills that have great views, and I think Henrietta might enjoy exploring." "That sounds perfect," Elena said, "as long as you don't mind going at chicken pace." The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect for hiking. Elena had borrowed an old pair of Marcus's work gloves and boots that were only slightly too big, and Henrietta had been fitted with a small harness that Elena had fashioned from rope, allowing the hen to explore while staying close. Marcus led them up a winding trail that cut through stands of oak and maple, their leaves just beginning to hint at the colors they'd show in a few weeks. "This trail was here when my great-grandfather first bought the land," Marcus explained as they climbed. "He used to say it was probably carved by deer long before any humans showed up. Some paths know where they're going before we do." Elena found herself breathing hard as they gained elevation, unused to physical exertion after months of uncertainty and poor nutrition. Marcus noticed and slowed his pace without comment, stopping frequently to point out landmarks or share stories about the land. "That's Eagle's Point," he said, indicating a rocky outcrop visible through the trees. "Best view on the property. On a clear day, you can see 3 counties from up there." "How much land do you have?" 1,500 acres, give or take. Most of it is pasture and woodland, but there are some good spots for crops if I ever decided to diversify. My grandfather always said the land would tell you what it wanted to be used for, if you learned how to listen. They reached a clearing about halfway up the ridge, and Marcus suggested they rest. Elena gratefully sank onto a fallen log, Henrietta immediately beginning to scratch for insects in the leaf litter. The view from the clearing was spectacular, rolling hills stretching to the horizon, pastures dotted with cattle and horses, the ranch house visible in the distance like something from a postcard. "It's beautiful," Elena said, and meant it. "No wonder you couldn't leave." "Some mornings I come up here just to remind myself why I stay," Marcus admitted. "When the bills pile up and the equipment breaks down, and I start thinking maybe I should sell to one of those developers who call every few months, I come up here and remember what this place really is." "What is it really?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "Home. Not just the house, but the whole idea of it. A place where things grow according to their own timeline, where the seasons matter more than the stock market, where you can raise animals and children and hope in equal measure." "Do you want children?" Elena asked, then immediately blushed. I'm sorry. That's none of my business. It's okay. Yes, I do. Always figured I'd have a family by now, but it never worked out that way. I was engaged a few years back to a woman named Sarah who worked at the bank in town. She was smart, beautiful, everything you'd want in a wife. But she wanted me to sell the ranch, move to Nashville, get a quote-unquote real job. What happened? I realized that if she couldn't love the ranch, she couldn't really love me. Not the me that matters, anyway. So we called it off. She moved to Nashville on her own, married a lawyer, has 2 kids now. I get updates through the small-town gossip network whether I want them or not. Elena nodded, understanding more than he might have expected. Daniel used to say that love without acceptance isn't really love at all. It's just the desire to change someone into who you think they should be. Smart man, he was. He loved me exactly as I was, bookkeeping quirks and chicken obsession and all. When I got worried about money or started obsessing over budgets, he'd just kiss my forehead and tell me he was grateful to have someone who cared enough to worry. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Henrietta explore the clearing with the serious concentration of a bird who took her job as chief ranch inspector very seriously. Elena found herself thinking about the difference between contentment and happiness, about how she'd been content with Daniel but felt something different here, something that might be the beginning of happiness. Marcus, she said finally, I need to tell you something. He turned to look at her, noting the serious tone in her voice. What is it? When Daniel was dying, he made me promise more than just finding you if I needed help. He made me promise to try to be happy again, after a reasonable period of mourning. He said he couldn't bear the thought of me spending the rest of my life grieving for him. That sounds like something a man who really loved you would say. He did love me, but he also knew me well enough to know that I'd feel guilty about moving on, about finding joy in anything after he was gone. He made me promise that if I ever met someone who made me want to try again, I wouldn't let grief stop me. Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly. Why are you telling me this? Elena met his eyes directly, and he saw a courage there that took his breath away. Because I think you might be that someone, and because I think you feel something too, even though neither of us expected it or planned for it. The words hung between them like a bridge that could either be crossed or burned. Marcus found himself thinking about timing, about whether 3 months was long enough to grieve a marriage, about whether he had any right to feelings this strong for a woman who'd lost her husband so recently. Elena, he said carefully, I don't want to take advantage of your situation. You're vulnerable right now, grateful for help, maybe confusing rescue with romance. I'm not confused, Elena said firmly. I'm 33 years old, Marcus. I've been married, I've loved deeply, I've lost everything that mattered to me. I know the difference between gratitude and attraction. What I feel for you isn't about needing to be saved. It's about recognizing something real when I see it. What do you see? I see a man who builds chicken coops for strays, who talks to his horses like friends, who's preserved something beautiful when it would have been easier to let it go. I see someone who's been alone by choice, but might be willing to share his life with the right person. And I see someone who looks at me like I'm worth something, even when I'm not sure I believe it myself. Marcus reached across the space between them and took her hand, noting how perfectly it fit in his. You're worth everything, Elena, but I need you to be sure. Not grateful, not desperate, but sure. I'm sure, she said without hesitation. The question is whether you're willing to take a chance on someone with more baggage than a cross-country move. Marcus squeezed her hand, feeling something shift inside him, like a door opening after being locked for years. I think I might be, he said. If you're willing to take a chance on a stubborn rancher who talks to animals and can't balance a checkbook to save his life. Elena laughed, and the sound echoed across the clearing like music. Henrietta looked up from her bug hunting, seemed to approve of the proceedings, and went back to work. In the distance, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, but for now, the sun was warm on their faces, and the future seemed full of possibility. 3 weeks into October, Elena was cataloging feed inventory in the barn when her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something about it seemed familiar. She almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity won. "Elena Morrison?" The voice was crisp, professional, with an edge that immediately put her on alert. "Yes, this is Elena. This is Janet Caldwell, attorney for the Morrison estate. I've been trying to reach you regarding your late husband's affairs." Elena's stomach dropped. She'd thought all of Daniel's legal matters had been settled months ago. "I don't understand. Everything was handled through probate. The debts, the house, everything was settled." "Not everything. There's been a development. I need to meet with you as soon as possible. Are you still at the Memphis address on file?" "No, I'm in Tennessee now." "What kind of development?" There was a pause, and Elena could hear papers shuffling. "Mrs. Morrison, it appears your husband had a life insurance policy through his pottery supplier that no one knew about. The beneficiary paperwork was misfiled, which is why it took so long to surface. The payout is substantial." Elena sank onto a hay bale, her legs suddenly unsteady. "How substantial?" $200,000 after taxes. "Mrs. Morrison, are you there?" Elena was there, but she felt like she was floating outside her body. $200,000. Enough to pay off every debt, enough to start over anywhere she wanted, enough to never have to depend on anyone again. "I'm here," she managed. "What do I need to do?" "I'll need you to come to Memphis to sign the paperwork. There are some formalities, but the money should be available within a week of processing." "Mrs. Morrison, this changes your situation considerably." After hanging up, Elena sat in the barn for a long time, watching dust motes dance in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the open doors. Henrietta wandered over and settled at her feet, sensing her distress. The hen had become remarkably good at reading human emotions. The money changed everything. It meant she didn't have to stay at the ranch out of necessity. It meant every conversation with Marcus, every moment of growing closeness, would now be viewed through the lens of choice rather than desperation. It meant she could leave, and he would wonder if she'd ever really wanted to be there at all. Marcus found her there an hour later, still sitting on the hay bale with Henrietta in her lap, staring at nothing. "Elena, everything okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She looked up at him, this man who'd become so important to her so quickly, and felt her heart break a little. "I got a call from a lawyer in Memphis. Daniel had a life insurance policy no one knew about. It just surfaced." Marcus went very still. "How much?" $200,000. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Marcus leaned against the barn wall, his face carefully neutral, but Elena could see the wheels turning in his head. She was no longer the desperate woman who'd crawled out from under his porch. She was a woman with options, with the freedom to go anywhere and do anything. "That's wonderful news," he said finally, and she could hear him trying to mean it. "You'll be able to start fresh anywhere you want." "Marcus, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't start pulling away from me because you think this changes things." "Doesn't it?" His voice was quieter now, more vulnerable. "Elena, you came here because you had nowhere else to go. Now you can go anywhere. Buy a house, start a business, travel the world if you want. Why would you choose to stay on a struggling ranch in the middle of nowhere?" Elena stood up, setting Henrietta gently on the ground, and walked over to where Marcus stood. She could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear she'd seen in high school when he'd wanted to ask her to prom but convinced himself she was out of his league. "Because maybe I don't want to go anywhere," she said. "Maybe I've found exactly where I belong. You don't have to say that. I'll understand if you want to leave. I know this was never meant to be permanent." Elena felt a flash of anger. "Is that what you think? That I've just been biding my time here, waiting for my real life to start somewhere else? Haven't you?" The question hung between them like an accusation. Elena realized that Marcus had been protecting himself all along, keeping part of his heart in reserve because he'd always assumed she would leave eventually. The knowledge hurt more than she'd expected. "No," she said firmly, "I haven't. But clearly you have been. You've been waiting for me to leave so you could tell yourself you were right not to get too attached." Marcus looked stung. "That's not fair, isn't it?" "Marcus, I told you 3 weeks ago that I was falling for you. I've been helping you rebuild this place, not just financially but emotionally. I've been trying to show you that I want to be here, that I choose to be here, And you've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because it always does, Marcus said, his voice rough with old pain. People leave, Elena. They find better opportunities, better lives, better men. Sarah left. My parents left this place the minute they could afford to move to Florida. Everyone leaves eventually. I'm not everyone, Elena said quietly. And I'm not Sarah. But if you can't trust that I might actually want to build a life here with you, then maybe I should leave. The words were out before she could stop them, and she saw Marcus flinch as if she'd slapped him. They stared at each other across the barn, years of hurt and hope and fear crackling between them like electricity. Elena, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to assume. Yes, you did. And maybe that's the real problem here. You've been so convinced that I'll leave that you haven't even considered what it would mean if I stayed. Before Marcus could respond, Elena walked past him toward the barn door. I need some air. And some time to think. She spent the rest of the afternoon walking the trails they'd hiked together, Henrietta following faithfully behind. The autumn air was crisp and clean, and the leaves were beginning their spectacular transformation from green to gold and crimson. It was beautiful here, peaceful in a way that fed her soul. But was it enough? The insurance money represented freedom. But what kind of freedom? The freedom to run away from another chance at happiness? The freedom to prove Marcus right about people always leaving? Or the freedom to choose her own path, regardless of what anyone expected? By the time she returned to the house, Marcus was sitting on the front porch, 2 cups of coffee growing cold on the table beside him. He looked up when she approached, and she could see that he'd been thinking too. Elena, can we talk? She settled into the chair beside him, noting that he'd automatically poured her coffee the way she liked it. Even in the middle of their first real fight, he'd been thinking about taking care of her. The gesture made her chest tight. I owe you an apology, Marcus said. Not just for this afternoon, but for the past 3 weeks. You're right. I have been waiting for you to leave. Not because I wanted you to, but because I was scared to believe you might stay. Why? Because wanting something that much makes losing it unbearable. I learned that when my grandfather died, when Sarah left, when I watched my parents choose a retirement community in Tampa over the land they'd grown up on. It's easier to keep people at arm's length than to risk having them walk away. Elena reached across the space between their chairs and took his hand. Marcus, I can't promise I'll never leave. Nobody can promise that. People die, situations change, life happens. But I can promise that I won't leave because I found something better. I won't leave because this isn't enough for me. What if you get bored? What if you miss the city? Miss having options? Miss being around people who understand your dreams? What if I don't? Elena countered. What if this is exactly what I've been looking for my whole life without knowing it? What if the reason I never felt completely settled anywhere else is because I was supposed to end up here? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. What are you going to do with the money? Elena had been asking herself the same question all afternoon. I'm going to pay off Daniel's remaining medical debts. I'm going to buy this ranch. Marcus's head snapped up. What? Not from you, Elena clarified quickly. With you. As a partner. You said this place barely breaks even, right? What if we use the insurance money to modernize some of the equipment? Maybe expand the chicken operation, diversify into organic produce for the farmers' markets. What if we turn this into the kind of ranch that could actually support a family? Elena, you can't just invest your entire windfall in someone else's dream. It's not someone else's dream anymore, she said firmly. It's ours. At least I hope it is. Unless you'd rather do this alone. Marcus stared at her, and she could see him wrestling with disbelief and hope. You really want to stay? Not because you have to, but because you want to? I really want to stay. I want to wake up every morning to the sound of horses in the pasture and Henrietta demanding her breakfast. I want to watch the seasons change from our front porch. I want to build something lasting with someone I love. The words slipped out before she'd planned them, and she felt her cheeks burn. It was too soon to talk about love, too much too fast. But it was also the truth. "You love me?" Marcus asked, his voice soft with wonder. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you offered to let me stay without asking for my ring as collateral, maybe even before that. Maybe since high school, and I just never got the chance to figure it out." Marcus stood up and pulled her to her feet, his hands framing her face. "Elena Morrison, you are the most stubborn, surprising, wonderful woman I've ever met. And yes, I want to build something with you. I want to turn this ranch into a home that can support the family we might have someday. I want to argue with you about bookkeeping and watch you spoil our chickens and fall asleep next to you every night for the next 50 years. Is that a proposal, Marcus Sullivan?" "Not yet," he said, echoing her words from weeks earlier. "But it's a promise. A promise that I'm done being scared of losing you and ready to start being grateful that I found you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, while Henrietta watched approvingly from her perch on the porch railing. When they finally broke apart, Elena felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness that she'd never experienced before. "There's just one thing," Marcus said, his forehead resting against hers. "What's that?" "We're gonna need a bigger chicken coop. If we're expanding the operation, Henrietta's gonna need some friends." Elena laughed, the sound carrying across the pastures where the horses lifted their heads curiously. "I think I can arrange that. Henrietta's been getting lonely anyway." As if summoned by her name, the hen flew down from the railing and settled between them, clucking contentedly. Elena looked down at the bird who'd been her only companion through the darkest months of her life, then up at the man who'd become her future. "Thank you," she whispered to Henrietta, "for bringing us home." The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and for the first time since Daniel's death, Elena felt like she could see clearly what came next. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was the life she chose. And that made all the difference. 6 months later, Sullivan Creek Ranch hummed with the kind of purposeful activity that comes from dreams being turned into reality. Elena stood in the doorway of what had once been Marcus's cluttered office, now transformed into a proper business center with filing systems that actually made sense, and a computer that could handle modern accounting software. Through the window, she could see Marcus working with their new ranch hand, Tommy, a recent high school graduate whose enthusiasm for horses rivaled his complete ignorance about everything else. The expansion had been more successful than either of them had dared to hope. Their chicken operation now boasted 40 birds, including Henrietta, who had appointed herself as the unofficial supervisor of all newcomers. The organic egg business was thriving, with a waiting list of customers from 3 counties over. They'd added a greenhouse for winter growing, and Elena's meticulously planned vegetable operation was already generating more income than the cattle had in the previous 2 years. But the real transformation was deeper than business success. The ranch felt alive in a way it hadn't since Marcus's grandfather's time. There was laughter echoing from the barns, purpose in every repair and improvement, and the steady rhythm of 2 people building something together. Elena was updating their crop rotation schedule when she heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway. She glanced out to see a sleek black sedan pulling up to the house, completely out of place among the pickup trucks and farm equipment. Her stomach tightened with a familiar anxiety. In her experience, unexpected visitors in expensive cars rarely brought good news. Marcus appeared from the direction of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag, his expression curious but wary. Elena met him on the front porch as a man in an expensive suit emerged from the sedan. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of polished appearance that screamed money and authority. "Mr. Sullivan, I'm Richard Blackwood from Blackwood Development Corporation. I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you." Marcus crossed his arms over his chest, his body language immediately defensive. "If this is about selling my land, you're wasting your time. Please, just hear me out. I think you'll find our offer very compelling." Blackwood's smile was practiced, professional, the kind that probably closed million-dollar deals in corporate boardrooms. "We're prepared to offer you $4 million for your property." Elena felt the number hit her like a physical blow. $4 million. More money than most people saw in a lifetime. More than enough to buy a dozen other ranches. To live anywhere, to do anything. "That's a generous offer," Marcus said carefully. "But like I said, I'm not interested in selling. Mr. Sullivan, with all due respect, this ranch is barely profitable. You're working yourself to death for what, maybe $50,000 a year if you're lucky? Our offer would set you up for life. You could retire, travel, buy a nice house in town where you wouldn't have to worry about drought or cattle prices or equipment failures. I appreciate the offer, but my answer is no. Blackwood's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. Perhaps you'd like some time to think about it? Discuss it with your wife here. He glanced at Elena, clearly assuming she'd be the voice of financial reason. I'm not his wife, Elena said quietly, but I am his business partner, and we're not interested. Ms. Morrison. Elena Morrison. Ms. Morrison, surely you understand the practical benefits of this offer. $4 million could buy you security, opportunity, freedom from the constant uncertainty of agricultural life. Elena felt Marcus tense beside her, and she understood why. This was the moment of truth. A wealthy developer offering enough money to solve every financial worry, to provide the security that had been missing from her life for so long. If she wavered, if she showed even a moment's temptation, it would confirm every fear Marcus had about her commitment to this life they were building. Mr. Blackwood, Elena said, her voice steady and clear, you seem to be under the impression that we see this ranch as a burden. You're wrong. This land, this life, it's not something we're trying to escape from. It's something we're trying to build into something extraordinary. Ms. Morrison, be realistic. You're talking about farming. In 10 years, small operations like this will be extinct, bought out by corporations or abandoned by families who can't make ends meet. You're fighting a losing battle. Maybe, Elena acknowledged, but it's our battle to fight. And frankly, I can't think of anything I'd rather fight for. Blackwood turned back to Marcus, clearly deciding that Elena was a lost cause. Mr. Sullivan, I've done my research. Your grandfather mortgaged this place 3 times to keep it running. Your father left because he couldn't make a living here. You're one bad season away from bankruptcy. Don't let pride cost you the chance to secure your future. My future is here, Marcus said firmly. My grandfather's future was here, and his grandfather's before him. Some things are worth more than money. Everything has a price, Mr. Sullivan. If $4 million isn't enough, perhaps we could discuss 5. Elena watched Marcus's face, saw the moment when his patience finally ran out. Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to say this one more time, as clearly as I can. This ranch is not for sale. Not for $4 million, not for $5 million, not for any amount of money. It's my home, it's my heritage, and it's my legacy. If you can't understand that, then you can't understand me. You're making a mistake, Blackwood said, his professional mask slipping slightly. Times are changing. Small ranches like this are dinosaurs. You can take our money now and leave with dignity. Or you can wait for the bank to foreclose and leave with nothing. Or, Elena said, stepping forward, we can prove you wrong. We can show that small operations run by people who actually care about the land can not only survive, but thrive. We can demonstrate that there's value in things that can't be measured in quarterly reports. Blackwood looked at her with something approaching respect. You really believe that, don't you? I do, and I'll tell you why. Because this ranch isn't just a business to us. It's a community. Tommy, our ranch hand, he's learning skills that will serve him his whole life. The families who buy our eggs and vegetables, they know where their food comes from and who grew it. The land itself is being cared for by people who plan to pass it on to the next generation. You can't put a price on that kind of value. Ms. Morrison, I admire your idealism, but the market doesn't care about your feelings. Supply and demand, profit and loss, that's what drives the real world. Then maybe it's time for the real world to remember that there are other things that matter, Marcus said. Mr. Blackwood, I think we're done here. Blackwood reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. When you change your mind, and you will, call me. This offer won't be available forever. He walked back to his car without another word, leaving Elena and Marcus standing on the porch in the wake of what felt like a battle they'd somehow won. They watched the sedan disappear down the gravel road, dust settling in its wake like the end of a storm. $4 million, Elena said softly. That's a lot of money. Marcus turned to look at her, and she could see the question in his eyes despite his trust in her. Having second thoughts? No, Elena said without hesitation. But I want you to know that I understand what we just turned down. I understand that most people would think we're crazy for walking away from that kind of money. Do you think we're crazy? Elena considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she might have said yes. 6 months ago, financial security had been her primary concern, the thing that kept her awake at night and drove every decision she made. But standing here on the porch of the home they'd built together, looking out over land that was becoming more beautiful and productive every day, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The deep satisfaction of choosing meaning over money. I think we're brave, she said finally. I think we're choosing to build something that matters instead of taking the easy way out. And I think your grandfather would be proud. Marcus pulled her into his arms, and she could feel some tension she hadn't even realized he was carrying finally release. Elena, I need you to know something. When he was talking about financial security and freedom from uncertainty, part of me wondered if you were thinking about how different your life could be with that money. Of course I was thinking about it, Elena said honestly. But you know what I was really thinking? I was thinking about how empty it would feel to have all that money and no one to share it with who really understood why I chose to walk away from it. You could have that money and still have someone to share it with. We could buy a beautiful house anywhere in the country, travel, live, without ever worrying about crop failures or equipment breakdowns. Elena stepped back far enough to look into his eyes. Marcus, do you want to sell? Number God. No, but I want to make sure you're choosing this life because it's what you want, not because you think it's what I need to hear. This is what I want, Elena said firmly. Not the struggle, not the uncertainty, but the purpose. The sense that what we're doing here matters. The feeling that we're building something that will outlast us. I've had money, Marcus. I've had financial security. It doesn't fill the holes in your life the way people think it will. What does? This, us. Work that means something. Land that we're making better instead of just using up. A life that we're creating together instead of just letting happen to us. She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. And the family we might have someday. Marcus went very still. Family? I'm 34, Marcus. If we're going to have children, we need to start thinking about it. And I can't imagine wanting to raise kids anywhere but here, where they can learn that some things are worth fighting for, even when it's hard. Elena Morrison, Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. Are you proposing to me? I'm telling you that I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this place into something our grandchildren will be proud to inherit. If that sounds like a proposal, then yes, I guess it is. Marcus laughed, the sound carrying across the pastures where their horses grazed peacefully in the afternoon sun. In that case, Elena Morrison, I accept. But I have one condition. What's that? Next time someone offers us millions of dollars for our home, you have to be the one to tell them no. You're much more eloquent about it than I am. Elena grinned. Deal. But I have a condition too. Name it. We get married right here on the ranch, under the oak tree where we had our first real conversation about staying, with Henrietta as the maid of honor. I think Henrietta would be honored, though we might want to invest in some tiny formal wear for the occasion. They were interrupted by the sound of clucking from the direction of the chicken coop. Henrietta appeared around the corner of the house, followed by a procession of newer hens, who seemed to regard her as their leader. The original hen walked directly to Elena and settled at her feet, as if she'd been following the entire conversation and approved of the proceedings. I think that's a yes from the wedding party, Elena observed. Good thing. I'd hate to have to find a new maid of honor at this late date. As the sun began to set behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Elena reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been a widow with nothing but a chicken and a wedding ring, hiding under a stranger's porch because she had nowhere else to go. Now she was a business owner, a partner, a woman who'd found love again in the most unexpected place. Marcus, she said, leaning against his shoulder as they watched their small empire settling into evening, do you think Daniel would approve? Of us? Of me choosing this life. Of me being happy again. Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering the weight of the question. From what you've told me about him, I think he'd be proud that you didn't just survive losing him. I think he'd be glad that you found a way to build something new while still honoring what you had with him." Elena nodded, feeling a peace she hadn't expected. Daniel's ring was still in her jewelry box upstairs, but she'd stopped wearing it weeks ago. Not because she'd forgotten him, or stopped loving the memory of what they'd shared, but because she'd finally learned the difference between honoring the past and being trapped by it. "I love you, Marcus Sullivan," she said, the words feeling both new and familiar, like coming home to a place she'd been meant to find all along. "I love you too, Elena Morrison, soon to be Elena Sullivan, if you'll have my name. I'll have your name, your land, your crazy dreams about making this ranch profitable, and your inability to balance a checkbook without supervision. That's quite a package deal. The best ones always are." As if to punctuate their conversation, Henrietta let out a satisfied cluck and settled more comfortably at Elena's feet. In the distance, their horses nickered softly to each other in the gathering dusk, and the lights of their farmhouse cast a warm glow across the front porch. It was home in every sense that mattered, and for the first time in her life, Elena understood that some things really were worth more than money. The woman who'd once hidden under a porch with nothing but a chicken and a wedding ring had found something she'd never expected to find again. A future worth fighting for, and someone worth building it with. The spring wedding under the old oak tree was everything Elena had dreamed it would be, and nothing like she'd ever imagined planning. Instead of a traditional church ceremony, they'd invited 50 of their closest friends and neighbors to celebrate on the land that had brought them together. Marcus wore his grandfather's suit, carefully altered to fit his broader shoulders, while Elena chose a simple cream dress that wouldn't show dirt if Henrietta decided to make an appearance during the vows. The hen, true to form, had appointed herself as the unofficial greeter, strutting among the guests in a tiny bow tie that Tommy's girlfriend had fashioned from yellow ribbon. The sight of their wedding party's maid of honor pecking curiously at the hem of the minister's robe had everyone laughing, including Reverend Phillips, who'd performed ceremonies for 3 generations of Sullivans. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice carrying across the pasture where white chairs were arranged in neat rows. "We gather today not just to witness the union of Marcus and Elena, but to celebrate the beautiful truth that love finds us when we need it most, often in the most unexpected ways." Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she looked out at the assembled guests. Tommy sat in the front row, his parents beside him, beaming with pride at their son who'd found his calling working with horses. Sarah Chen, the veterinarian who'd become both their business partner and Elena's closest friend, held her toddler daughter who kept pointing excitedly at Henrietta. Neighbors who'd initially been skeptical about the city woman who'd shown up with grand plans for organic farming now nodded approvingly as they looked around at the thriving operation surrounding them. "Elena," Reverend Phillips continued, "do you take Marcus to be your husband, to share in his dreams and support his struggles, to build a life together on this land that has already blessed you both?" "I do," Elena said, her voice strong and clear. "I choose Marcus, I choose this life, and I choose the family we'll build together." When it came time for rings, Marcus surprised her by pulling out not just a simple gold band, but a second ring she'd never seen before. It was vintage, with a small diamond surrounded by tiny emeralds that caught the afternoon light like captured starfire. "This was my grandmother's," he said softly, sliding it onto her finger. "She would have loved you, Elena. She would have loved seeing this place come alive again." The reception was held right there in the pasture, with tables set up between the barn and the house, lit by strings of lights that Tommy had spent 2 days hanging. Elena's sister had driven down from Nashville with homemade wedding cake, while their neighbors contributed everything from barbecue to 3 different kinds of cornbread. It felt like a community celebration, which was exactly what Elena had wanted. As the sun began to set, Marcus pulled Elena onto the makeshift dance floor they'd created by laying down plywood between the barn doors. Their first dance was to a Johnny Cash song that had been playing on the radio the morning they'd decided to become business partners, and Elena felt the rightness of it all settle into her bones. "No regrets?" Marcus asked as they swayed together, surrounded by the laughter and conversation of people who'd become their chosen family. "Only one," Elena said, and felt him tense slightly. "I regret that it took us 15 years to find our way back to each other." "Maybe we needed those 15 years, Marcus said thoughtfully. "Maybe we wouldn't have been ready for this when we were 18. Maybe, but I'm grateful Daniel made me promise to find you. I'm grateful he loved me enough to want me to be happy again." I'm grateful too. For him. For the promise. For the courage it took you to drive down that dirt road and crawl under my porch with a chicken. Elena laughed, remembering that morning that felt like a lifetime ago. Henrietta deserves most of the credit. She's the one who picked your porch. Smart bird. Though I notice she's been eyeing that new rooster we bought last week. I think our maid of honor might be planning a wedding of her own soon. Good for her. Everyone deserves a second chance at love. 2 years after their wedding, Elena stood in the same spot under the oak tree, but this time she was holding something precious. Their daughter, Grace, was 6 months old, with Marcus's blue eyes and Elena's stubborn chin, and she seemed utterly fascinated by the chickens that wandered freely around the yard. She's going to be trouble, Marcus observed, settling onto the blanket beside them with a bottle and a burp cloth. Look how she watches Henrietta. She's planning something. Of course she is. She's our daughter. Planning and scheming are in her DNA. The ranch had continued to flourish beyond their wildest dreams. Their organic produce operation now supplied 3 farmers markets and 2 upscale restaurants in Nashville. The chicken business had expanded to include heritage breeds that commanded premium prices from chefs who appreciated authenticity. They'd added goats, bees, and a small herd of sheep whose wool Elena was learning to process for sale to fiber artists. But the real success was harder to quantify. It was in the way Tommy had grown from an uncertain teenager into a confident young man who managed the livestock with skill and pride. It was in the neighboring farms that had started adopting some of their sustainable practices after seeing the results. It was in the school groups that visited regularly to learn about where their food came from, and how farming could work in harmony with nature, rather than in spite of it. Elena, Marcus said, his voice unusually serious, I got a call today from Richard Blackwood. Elena looked up sharply. The developer? What did he want? To apologize, actually. Turns out the housing development he built on the Peterson property 2 counties over is having major problems. Flooding, septic failures, foundation issues. He's facing a class action lawsuit from the homeowners. That's terrible for those families. It is. But he said something interesting. He said he'd been thinking about our conversation, about what you said about land being cared for by people who plan to pass it on. He wants to discuss a different kind of partnership. Elena raised an eyebrow. What kind of partnership? He wants to invest in conservation easements, protecting agricultural land from development permanently, providing financial incentives for farmers who commit to sustainable practices. He thinks what we've built here could be a model for other operations. Richard Blackwood wants to become a conservationist? Apparently losing $30 million in lawsuits can change a man's perspective pretty quickly. He asked if we'd be willing to consult on identifying other properties that might benefit from this kind of approach. Elena considered this unexpected turn of events. What do you think? I think maybe the real world is finally starting to remember what you told him about things that matter. And I think we might be able to help more families stay on their land instead of being forced to sell to developers. Grace chose that moment to grab a handful of Elena's hair and stuff it in her mouth, causing both parents to laugh as they gently extracted it. Henrietta, now a matriarch of impressive dignity despite her advancing age, wandered over to investigate the commotion, clucking approvingly at the baby who regarded her with solemn attention. Remember when you asked me if I thought Daniel would approve of us? Marcus said, watching his daughter study the hen who'd brought them together. I remember. I think he'd be proud of more than just you finding love again. I think he'd be proud of what you've built here, how you've taken care of the land and the community and turned one family's dream into something that benefits everyone. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. It had been 3 years since Daniel's death, and while the sharp edge of grief had softened, she still missed him in quiet moments like this. But she'd learned to carry both love and loss, to honor the past while embracing the future. I got a letter yesterday, she said, from his sister. She's getting married next month, and she asked if she could visit the ranch before the wedding. She wants to see where I landed, she said. Where I found my happiness again. What did you tell her? I told her yes, of course, and I told her to bring her fiancé. I want them to see what's possible when you choose love over fear, when you choose to build something together instead of just surviving separately. Grace had grown bored with Elena's hair and was now reaching for Henrietta, who stepped just close enough for tiny fingers to brush her feathers before moving gracefully out of range. The interaction made Elena think about boundaries and trust, about how relationships develop over time through patience and respect. "Marcus," she said, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if Blackwood had offered us $6 million instead of $4 or $8 million? Do you?" "Sometimes. Not because I wish we'd taken it, but because I'm curious about where our breaking point would have been. How much money would it have taken to make us doubt what we were building here?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. "I don't think it was ever about the amount," he said finally. "I think it was about understanding what we were really choosing between. Money versus meaning, security versus purpose. A comfortable life versus a meaningful one. And you think we chose correctly? Elena, look around. Look at what we've built, not just in terms of business success, but in terms of community, legacy, love. Look at our daughter, who's going to grow up understanding that some things can't be bought, only earned through dedication and hard work. Yes, I think we chose correctly." Grace had fallen asleep in Elena's arms, lulled by the afternoon warmth and the gentle sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Henrietta had claimed her usual spot at Elena's feet, and in the distance they could hear Tommy talking to the horses as he brought them in for the night. "I have news," Elena said, her voice soft so as not to wake the baby. "Good news?" "I think so. Dr. Chen confirmed it yesterday. We're pregnant again." Marcus went very still, then broke into a grin that transformed his entire face. "Really?" "Really, Grace is going to be a big sister." "How do you feel about that?" Elena considered the question. A year ago, she might have worried about finances, about how they'd manage 2 children while running a growing business. Now, she felt only excitement and gratitude. "I feel like we're exactly where we're supposed to be," she said. "Like this ranch has room for all the love and all the dreams we can pour into it." "When?" "Early spring. Right around the time the first chicks hatch." Marcus laughed. "Henrietta's going to love having more babies to supervise." As if she understood they were talking about her, the old hen opened one eye and clucked softly before settling back into her afternoon nap. Elena looked down at her sleeping daughter, then out across the land that had become their kingdom, their legacy, their greatest achievement. The woman who'd once hidden under a porch with nothing but a chicken and a wedding ring had built something extraordinary. Not just a business or a marriage, but a life that honored both the past and the future, that created value that couldn't be measured in dollars, that proved every day that some things really were worth more than money. The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in brilliant colors that would fade and return again tomorrow, constant as love, reliable as hope, beautiful as the promise that the best parts of life were still to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.